Tonight's topic is the Purple Triangle and the Nazi persecution of Christians. And not a lot is known about this. Everybody knows that they persecuted the Jews, but it didn't stop there. In fact, there were 8 categories of people that were persecuted and sent to concentration camps. But before I go any further, I want to read from Ephesians 6:12, verse that I assume that you're familiar with. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. So just try to keep that one in mind as I go through this. Now, I want to give you a brief quote to start off with from Winston Churchill of June 18th, 1940, right on the heels of the miracle at Dunkirk, where Britain was able to evacuate their army from the beaches of France under heavy cloud cover and calm seas. And one of the things that he said was that the Battle of France is over and the Battle of Britain is about to begin. And upon this battle rests the future of Christian civilization. Now, he knew what he was talking about. The rest of the world at that time did not. And that was not an exaggeration. But, okay.
Don't worry about that. That's from earlier.
But Churchill was a man of tremendous foresight and insight, and he was always ahead of the curve, and he understood what Hitler and the Nazis were really about before the rest of the world did. And yes, Christianity was at stake. Now, you might say, wait a minute, didn't the German people profess Christianity too? Yes, they certainly did. In fact, almost all of them did profess some form of Christianity. And these are the numbers from 1933. Out of 65,218,000, 67% professed Protestantism. The other 33% were Catholics. Less than 1% were Jews. And they were more religious than the average American is right now. Right now in America, less than a quarter of people go to church. At least 3 out of 8 weeks, anyway. Of course, it was 56% back in the 40s. But what was happening here? How could this have happened? Well, the fact of the matter is that Germany was being misled. The German people were being misled by their own government. In fact, their government had a very anti-Christian agenda, and they weren't being told about it. So what were they being told? Well, if you go back to the early years of the Nazi Party, which began in 1919, right after the First World War, Germany was being forced to institute a democracy under the Treaty of Versailles. Well, one of the parties that they had was called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, otherwise known as the Nazis. Well, in 1920, they put out a manifesto, their platform, and one of the things that they had to say about religion is that we demand the freedom of all religious denominations in the state, insofar as they do not jeopardize the state's existence or conflict with the manner and moral sentiments of the Germanic race. The party as such upholds the point of view of a positive Christianity without tying itself confessionally to any one denomination. It combats the Jewish materialistic spirit at home and abroad, and so on. Well, I guess that might sound fair enough to the average Christian, and that was enough to placate them. But of course, you can even see from that one statement that they expected people to put the government ahead of their religion. And that was one of the main points of the Nazi regime, was that Hitler came first and your religion comes second or third or fourth at all. And in fact, what did they really mean by a positive Christianity? What's wrong with being positive? It sounds nice, doesn't it? Well, what did they really mean? Well, this is from, that's from a Wikipedia article, and I know that some people don't like Wikipedia, but they do have bibliographies and they cite sources and they have professional editors that edit these things. But it says, the Nazi Party promoted positive Christianity, a movement which rejected most traditional Christian doctrines such as the divinity of Jesus, as well as Jewish elements such as the Old Testament. They thought the Old Testament was a Jewish document. They didn't like that. And, in fact, what they were doing is they were saying one thing and doing another thing, and they believed another thing. The leaders of the Nazi movement hated Christianity, and they said so privately time and time again. Now, I've got numerous quotes on this, and let's have some of them. Hitler's propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, saw an insoluble opposition between the Christian and Nazi worldviews. The Fuhrer angered the churches by appointing Alfred Rosenberg, an outspoken pagan, as the official Nazi ideologist in 1934. Heinrich Himmler saw the main task of the SS organization to be that of acting as a vanguard in overcoming Christianity and restoring a Germanic way of living. Himmler was a practicing pagan, by the way. Hitler's chosen deputy, Martin Bormann, advised Nazi officials in 1941 that National Socialism and Christianity are irreconcilable. All right, now, like I said, that they talked about establishing what they call the positive Christianity, aiming to replace the established churches to reduce their influence. Now, here's another explanation for positive Christianity. This is from 1937. Dr. Zellner and the Catholic Bishop of Munster, Count Galen, have tried to make clear to me that Christianity consists in faith of Christ as the Son of God. That makes me laugh. No, Christianity is not dependent on the Apostles' Creed. True Christianity is represented by the party, and the German people are now called by the party, and especially the Führer, to a real Christianity. The Führer is the herald of a new revelation. Now, here's another good one. Albert Speer, he was Hitler's personal architect. He was one of Hitler's buddies. He said Hitler viewed Christianity as the wrong religion for the Germanic temperament. Speer wrote that Hitler would say, "You see, it's been our misfortune to have the wrong religion. Why didn't we have the religion of the Japanese, who regard sacrifice to the fatherland as the highest good? Islam, too, would have been much more compatible to us than Christianity. Why did it have to be Christianity with its meekness and flabbiness?" Well, people don't respect meekness. Hitler certainly didn't. And I can go on and on. I've got tons of them. Now, this is Alan Bullock, who was a British biographer. I have his book, Hitler Intended to Destroy the Influence of Christian Churches in Germany After the War. In his memoirs, Hitler's chief architect, Albert Speer, recalled that when drafting his plans for the new Berlin, he consulted Protestant and Catholic authorities, but was curtly informed by Hitler's private secretary, Martin Bormann, that churches were not to receive building sites. Hitler's Germanization of Eastern Europe, he had made it clear that there would be no place in the German utopia for Christian churches. That was his long-term plan. Well, they were only in power for 12 years and 3 months, and they were not able to carry out that plan. But that was their long-term plan, but the German people did not know it. Now, here's another good one from Goebbels' diary, December 1939. The Führer is a deeply religious, though completely anti-Christian. He views Christianity as a symptom of decay, as a branch of the Jewish race. This can be seen in the similarity of the religious rites. They have no point of contact with the animal element, and thus they will be destroyed. That was his plan, but he couldn't tell people that because, after all, almost everybody claimed to be a Christian, so they had to take a more subtle approach. And part of that approach was deception, and part of it was to divide and conquer. Now, almost everybody was either a Protestant or a Catholic in Nazi Germany, but there were some other groups besides that. They were people Now let's go to the next picture with the badges. The
The badges, okay, let me go to the badges.
You see, a lot of governments will tell people what they want to hear, but they have a much different agenda and they're actually working against their own people. That's what was happening here. The Germans were being deceived, and like I said, there were 8 different categories of people that were being persecuted. And here's the
This is the one you want?
right. Now, we have 8 different categories here. The first one is the red triangle, which was usually worn by communists or any enemy of the state, political enemy. Then you had the green triangle worn by common criminals. The blue triangle was by the emigre. The purple triangle is the main one I want to talk about today, and that stood for Bible Forscher, which meant Bible student. The pink triangle were homosexuals. The black triangle were the anti-socials. And then, of course, you had the yellow Star of David, which were the Jews. Now, I want to read the Wikipedia article on the purple triangle. It's very brief. The purple triangle was a concentration camp badge used by the Nazis to identify the Bible students in Nazi Germany. The purple triangle was introduced in July 1936 with other concentration camps such as those of Dachau and Buchenwald following in 1937 and 1938. In the winter of 1935-36, before the onset of the war, Jehovah's Witnesses have been reported to make up 20 to 40% of the prisoners in concentration camps. The purple triangle was originally introduced to identify Jehovah's Witnesses. As the number and diversity of prisoners accelerated, the category represented by the purple triangle expanded to include other prisoners held due to their religious convictions, including clergy of other denominations, Adventists, Baptists, Bible student splinter groups, and pacifists. However, Jehovah's Witnesses continued to make up the majority of the prisoners in this category. Jehovah's Witnesses came into conflict with the Nazi regime because they refused to use the Hitler salute, believing that it conflicted with their worship of Jehovah. Because refusing to use the Hitler salute was considered a crime, they were arrested and their children attending school were expelled, detained, and separated from their families. When Germany made military enlistment mandatory, they were persecuted because they refused to bear arms. Being politically neutral, they also refused to vote in elections. But there was another element to this because they also refused to participate in the Hitler youth camps, which were mandatory. And those camps were absolutely satanic, and they turned those kids into a bunch of monsters. And like I said, the Seventh-day Adventists also refused to do that. Now, what about the Seventh-day Adventists? Where did they fit in? Well, I'm getting to that here because, well, like I said, people figured, well, they came after these small groups. They came after the Jehovah's Witnesses. In fact, when did they put it? November 26, 1933, the Nazi state banned the small denominational churches. Among those prohibited were the Seventh-day Adventists. The Adventists decided to seek legal advice on what to do, and within 2 weeks, the ban was lifted on the Adventist denomination. After this, it was decided that within the denomination that positive Christianity meant support for the Nazi state. To show their support for the Nazi state, the Adventists sent a letter to the Nazi Ministry of the Interior, an official memorandum on Adventist teachings, church organizations, social actions, and attitudes toward the government. The Adventists also informed the Interior that the church members hold German attitudes, pointing out that the government's suspicion and concern should be to a rival schismatic group, the Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement, whose attitudes the Adventists insisted were far from German. Now, those were the people, the Adventist Reform Movement, those were the ones that were sent to concentration camps and wore the purple triangle along with the Jehovah's Witnesses. The regular Adventists completely sold out. Now, this schism happened back in the First World War, and it developed over the issue of military service. Now, the Seventh-day Adventist Church began in America May 21st of 1863 during the Civil War. Their position has always been against military service. They've never wavered from that in America, but in Germany during the First World War, they sold out, and they said, now you can join the military as a combatant, and you don't even have to keep the Sabbath while you're in the military. Well, not only the German Adventists went for that, some of them broke away and they formed their own movement. That's the Adventist Reform Movement, and they did not believe in military service. Well, that was required in Nazi Germany, and those people were severely persecuted for that. Now, I don't know exactly how many of them there were, and it's very difficult to find specific numbers on this. Now, for a long time, the number of non-Jewish victims of the Holocaust was supposedly 5 million, and that was a number that the late Simon Wiesenthal came up with. He was the famous Nazi hunter, and he started saying that back in the 1970s. Wiesenthal later said that he made that number up. The real number, according to Jewish historian Yehuda Bauer, this is from the Virtual Jewish Library, said that the real number of people, non-Jews that died in concentration camps, was only about 500,000, not 5 million. Now, how many of them wore the purple triangle? Now, that's been very difficult for me to ascertain. I can tell you that there were between 20 and 30,000 Jehovah's Witnesses in Germany in the 20s and 30s and into the 40s. Now, according to to Wikipedia, from the article on Hitler's religious beliefs, 6,000 of them were sent to concentration camps. But then you had some of the Adventist Reform movement was in there too, and some others as well. And I don't know how many of them there were. I'm sure that the total number of people that wore the purple triangle would have been less than 10,000. How many of them survived? There's no way of knowing for sure. And even though these people did not have the exact same religious beliefs that we do, I have a tremendous respect for them because they put God first, and hardly anyone else did that. And it's easier said than done. These people really suffered for that. A lot of them did not even survive. And it's a tough situation to be in. I would not want to be in that situation, but remember that Jesus said, you have to put God first, even above your own family. And in Acts 5:29, the Apostle Peter said, we ought to obey God rather than men. Well, that's not what was happening in Nazi Germany. They were just selling out in droves. And they were afraid for their lives. They were watching Jews being persecuted. They were watching other groups being persecuted. But the Nazis knew that the Protestants and Catholics didn't care about people outside of their own denomination. In fact, in the case of the Adventists, of course, they sold out their rivals from the Adventist Reform Movement, and it didn't stop there because there were people that were Jews by race that became Adventists, and they were disfellowshipped. I mean, you want to talk about somebody throwing somebody under the bus. They didn't even stand up for people in their own church. I mean, it was just shameful. And in the Adventist literature, they praised Hitler to high heaven. They said that he was chosen by God. They completely backed the whole war. They thought that God was on the side of the Nazis. And they had a lot of their stuff in their own literature. Then, in the late 30s, their leader, his name was Adolf Mink, M-I-N-C-K, was arrested by the Gestapo and thrown in prison. Well, once he got out of prison, he said that it's wrong not to work on the Sabbath. You want to talk about selling out? They did a complete 180 even on the Sabbath. They said that it's all right to serve in the military as a combatant. You don't have to keep the Sabbath. They praised Hitler. They sold out the Jewish members of their church. They sold out the Adventist Reform Movement. And you would have expected a little better from them. But that's just not how it worked. Now, Romans 12:2 says, Paul wrote, do not be conformed to this world, but be renewed in your mind, that by testing you may discern the will of God. Well, they weren't doing that. Now, I want to try to explain what could have possibly led to this. And I'm not trying to make any excuses for anybody, but I want to try to set the scene and try to put this into perspective. And like I said, publicly the Nazis were supporting Christianity. But they had a three-pronged message that had a lot of appeal to the average German. Part of it was, well, first they had their anti-Semitism, and that was nothing new, but they took it to a new level, and they used a lot of very crass, primitive propaganda to do it. And sure enough, it worked. People bought it. And really, up until the 1930s, Jews were not being actively persecuted. And like I said, when I read the article in the Purple Triangle, the Jehovah's Witnesses in 1935 and 36 made up 20 to 40% of the people in the concentration camps. Well, they didn't start sending Jews to the concentration camps till the Kristallnacht, November 9th, 1938. And then the makeup of the camp started to change. But the Jehovah's Witnesses were being persecuted even before the Jews were. Not in the same way, but they were just as much of a target. And they could have sold out. These people were being offered documents. They were told, if you sign this document recanting your beliefs, you'll be off the hook and you'll be free to go. And some people signed it, but very, very few did. They held out. They put God first. Where was I? All right. Now I wanted to explain what the situation was in the 1920s and 30s in Germany. And they were, of course, Germany was devastated by the First World War, and they weren't the only ones. France and Belgium and Britain was too. But their economy was in the tank. They had started inflating their currency during the war, and one of the reasons why they lost the war is because they ran out of money. Then, first of all, when they did lose the war, the German people couldn't believe it because they were told the whole time that they were winning. And November 11th, 1918, and when they were told that they lost, they just couldn't believe it. It didn't make sense to them. They had not been invaded. They had not been bombed. They thought this must be a mistake. Then the following year at the Treaty of Versailles, they were told, yes, now we're going to have to make reparations payments for decades to come. And their army had to be pared down to just 100,000 men. And they considered that to be a complete insult. That was one of the main platforms of the Nazi Party. We want to overturn the Treaty of Versailles. We're not going to make any more reparations, and we're going to rebuild our army. And that had a lot of appeal to a lot of Germans. Even to this day, the Treaty of Versailles is still very controversial. A lot of people are still upset about it. It actually wasn't as bad as it's been made out to be. But that was a big issue that the Nazis were pushing. Then there was of course, I said the anti-Semitism. That was an easy sell. Then there was the
Hey, Mark.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can share my screen or not, but I have a.
Oh, here, let me give you permission.
All right.
And
I just wanted to show this German money. It's 100,000 marks. Just because you were bringing up the economic distress they were in, inflating their currency.
hang on. I gotta give you permission to do that. Hang on a second.
Oh, never mind. I can just do it this way. Can you see this?
Yeah.
It says 100,000 at the bottom.
Right. Yeah.
This is a German paper money.
That's a real one.
This is authentic.
Wow.
I got a couple of
Now
them.
it's finally worth something, right?
No, it's not worth anything.
Well,
It's worth almost zero, but it's just a novelty to have, as part of. I keep it in my collection of novelties, but it's a 10,000 German marks because of what they did to their economy.
Hey, Mark, I have a similar thing. I came in worldwide in '69, and there was a older guy there, Wilhelm Junks. I'll never forget him. And he was a devoted church member. And he and his wife, well, they had lived in Germany and he fought for Germany in World War I. And he talked about how terrible it was in the trenches and how cold. And if you want to be a little gross, he said their guns would freeze, and when they were ready to fight in the morning, they'd have to actually pee on their gun chambers to get the bolt to come back open. To weld it, but to thaw it out. Anyway,
Can't find a date.
he said in 94, well, he said, I heard during the war, the German officers talking and said, there's going to be another war. He was there in California, and he said, I said, come on, Mama, there's going to be another war. We're going to America. So he wanted to buy this pair of shoes. That's where I'm getting to. Before he left for Germany, and the guy said, it's 7 million marks. And he said, okay, I get paid next week, I get 1.5 million marks. I'll be back. So he came back and he said, I got the 7 million marks now. And the guy said, no, now it's 9 million marks. Anyway, that's his story.
Well, okay, what happened was, like I said, they were ordered to pay reparations under the treaty. Well, in 1923, the French started demanding those payments, but the Germans didn't have it, and that's when they really started pumping up their currency. So they just printed up millions of Deutschmarks and gave it to the French. Well, nobody came out ahead because it completely ruined their currency. Then, in the early 30s, the Great Depression hit, and they were really clobbered by that. Germans were actually more affected by that than America was. And the Germans were really hurting. And they were pretty angry. And of course, the finger started pointing. Of course, the Jews were an easy target. So that was convenient for them. Then, but just remember, Germany had a parliament, and they did not have a two-party system like we do. And it wasn't really working for them because no one party had a majority. Even in 1933, the Nazi Party, there was the largest party, but they did not have a majority. They only had a 44% of the seats in the German Reichstag. So most Germans in 1933 did not support the Nazi Party. Then, August 2nd, 1934, Paul von Hindenburg, the president of Germany, died at the age of 86. Well, the Nazis seized the day, and they decided, we're not going to bother with any more elections. We're all these different political parties. And he got away with it. Now, one of the reasons why it was because, first of all, the economy had started to improve right after Hitler became chancellor on January 30th, 1933. But he was in the right place at the right time because the economies across the industrial world all started to improve at that exact same time. It wasn't really his doing. And it was actually the president of the Reichsbank, Hjalmar Schacht was his name. He was the real genius behind the economic recovery in Germany, not Hitler. Schacht resigned in 1936, and he said Germany has been taken over by criminals, and he was right. But Hitler and the Nazis took the credit for the economic recovery. Then, when von Hindenburg died, the economy had been improving for about a year and a half. The Nazis seized the day and he said, well, okay, we're not going to have a president anymore. And now Hitler's the Führer, and he got away with it. But you have to remember that the democracy that the Germans had for the previous 15 years simply was not working, because if you don't have one party with a majority, then you're going to have a stalemate, you're going to have all these deadlocks. And they had a lot of trouble getting anything done. Now, other countries have parliaments, they've been able to make it work, like in Britain. They have a parliament, they have several parties, but Britain really has a two-party system. Almost everybody in their parliament is either a member of the Tory party or the Labour Party. So they've been able to make it work, but it wasn't like that in Germany. They had a multitude of different political parties. They couldn't get along. And it just was not working for them. Germany did not have a long tradition of democracy. They only had a democracy for 15 years if there was a disaster. And they were sick and tired of it. So they thought they'd try something new, and sure enough, the economy continued to improve through the rest of the 30s. And that's the one issue that people care most about. That's what affects them the most. So they were willing to give Hitler a blank check, mostly based on the economy. Now, at that time, I mean, we have the benefit of hindsight. We know what happened after that, but they didn't know that they were going to end up invading more than a dozen different countries, and they didn't know that there was going to be a Holocaust. The Germans didn't know about the Holocaust till after the war, and I know a lot of people don't believe that, but that was concealed, and the vast majority of the killing in the Holocaust happened outside of Germany, and mostly happened in Poland and in Russia, and that's one of the reasons why the Germans didn't know about it. By the time they found out about it, it was too late. And like I said, they were simply being misled by people that actually practiced paganism. They hated Christianity. They were trying to destroy it. People to this day still don't understand that. But we have to put God first. Otherwise, we're going to be taken for a ride. And who knows what's going to happen. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to happen here. I hope not. But I have a hard time trusting any of our leaders. Our governments don't always tell us the truth. They'll tell you what they want you to hear. But they might have a hidden agenda. Now, do we have any comments?
Yes, I wanted to jump in if I might. The Seventh-day Adventist Church in Russia. I wish I knew when this was, but they did the same thing to the Reform movement in Russia. Collaborated with the government and with the Russian Orthodox Church, and sold out their fellow Adventist brethren in Russia. My wife began her Sabbath keeping career about 30 some years ago, and she was very quickly became a protester against the General Conference when she found out these kinds of treacheries that took place in various countries. So I'm wondering if this COVID thing does not bear some of the similar remarks, the government lying to us and taking away our First Amendment rights, etc. But that's a subject for another day.
I'll show the pictures of the priests.
Yeah, I'm getting to it. We're going to show some pictures of the priest once I figure out where the file is.
Oh, Mark?
Yeah.
This is John Holman. I'm getting my other computer out to try to find something since you were talking about Marx. My father was not in Germany in World War II. He's deceased now, but he was in Belgium. Somehow he got a hold of, well, I have a little bit of French paper money, but I have a 10 million mark note. And from trying to find the exact one like that, I couldn't. But I did discover some years ago on the internet that even the various provinces had their own marks. It wasn't just from the national government that printed the money. So it got really out of hand, and everybody's probably heard stories of wheelbarrows of money or using it as wallpaper. So I'm going to see if I can find that, and if I can find it, I'll share it later.
All right. Now, can you see the picture here?
Yeah, I got it. All right, we should be sharing.
Yeah, I see it.
All right, good. Well, here's you can see Joseph Goebbels on the right, and there's a lot of pictures like this. There's tons of them. These priests in Italy and Germany that were selling out. And now here's another thing. Hitler often spoke of a 1,000-year Reich. Did you ever wonder where he came up with that number from? Where did he get that from? I think it's in Revelation 20, verse 4. He was actually trying to rip off the millennium, and he was trying to rip off God's plan. He was trying to replace God with himself, and he nearly succeeded at it. That's what he was trying to do. All right, here's, I don't know if you can see that there. It's a purple triangle armband. Sometimes they were made to wear the triangles on their chest. And to my knowledge, there may still be some people alive today that lived through this and can actually remember it. So it wasn't really that long ago.
Is there anything else?
Did I mention that, well, there were a lot of Catholic priests that were sent to camps, but they wore a red triangle. They were not there because of their religion. They were there because they were Poles, and the Germans were trying to wipe out the Poles. And they started with their leaders, especially the priests. And 20% of the Polish people died in World War II. The Germans invaded on September 1st, 1939, and then a few weeks later, the Russians invaded from the east. And the Russians were actually even more cruel to the Poles than the Germans were, especially to the women. And the Russians never gave up the eastern half of Poland. They still have it to this day. But that was their plan. But yeah, the Purple Triangle was worn by Jehovah's Witnesses and the Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement. And that was about it. And there were less than 10,000 of them. I don't know what their survival rate was, though.
No, I'm imagining that there was a Church of God, modern Sabbath keeping, feast keeping Church of God person. They probably got lumped into that group.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Or they would be Jewish sympathizers.
we would have been in that group. I am quite certain. We would have been thrown in those camps. We would have been wearing a purple triangle. So you have to remember that.
Has anybody ever heard of the last name Hazel?
Yes. I read that book, A Thousand Shall Fall.
Yes.
About Franz Hassel. He was a Seventh-day Adventist who served in the German army in both of the world wars. He was in the 999th Pioneer Park Brigade, which was a combat engineers unit. He managed to keep the Sabbath in the army through the whole war. And he was one of just 3 people from that original unit that ended up surviving. And it's an amazing story. I read that over 7 years ago. And it's a really excellent book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that he would have been the grandfather of Michael Hazel, who's head of the Old Testament department at Southern Adventist in Collegedale, Tennessee. And he's a very fine Egyptologist, and I've come to know him personally over the last 10 years. But that would have been the in-between gentleman, Michael Hazel's father, the son of the gentleman who wrote the book. I thought it was interesting how long they waited to publish that story of the grandfather and him serving under Hitler. They might have been worried about some backlash, but the father ended up was also a very scholarly gentleman, Gerhard Hazel, I believe his name was, and he ended up persecuting people within the Adventist movement who started questioning 1844 and the start of investigative judgment and some of the doctrines that came about when the prophecies failed in 1843 and 1844.
That was before the Adventist. That was the Millerite movement, and they were Sunday keepers. But I can tell you that well, it was Ellen G. White and her husband and 2 other men that founded the Adventists in 1863. Ellen was a false prophetess, made numerous false prophecies, including one where she said that Jesus was going to return in 1914. And of course, that fell flat. She's still an idol to the Adventists to this day.
Yeah, she also she pontificated on a lot of things that were outside her field of expertise, such as the Hebrew calendar. And they had an October 26th Day of Atonement in 1844. And you have Adventists to this day who will defend that as a proper date for the 10th day of the 7th month. But of course, we know it's a month too late.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, it doesn't matter what she pontificated on, they defend it.
Well, she had over 80 of these visions where she would go into a trance, and in some cases she said she was visiting other planets. I mean, it just was absolutely ridiculous. But she is still very much an idol.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Any other comments or thoughts, ideas, pictures of slightly inflated money? You'd hold up $1. It's worth what, okay?
Yeah, people forget that the dollar's now worth about 1% of what it was worth in 19 teens back before World War I, when the Federal Reserve took over the authority of printing our dollars and issuing them at interest. So that hurts a lot of poor people and middle class people.
Yeah.
Oh, and then I almost forgot.
I forgot.
There's another aspect to this that I thought was interesting. And let's start off with Revelation. Is it 9? Yeah, Revelation 9:21. And they did not repent of their murders or their sorceries or their sexual immorality or their thefts. And this is from the 6th trumpet. And the word for sorceries here is the word pharmakia. And it's the basis of the word pharmacy or pharmaceuticals. And it can be translated as enchantment through drugs. This also comes in what is it? Revelation 18:23 and Revelation 21:8. Now, this is another aspect of the whole Nazi regime that I thought was pretty interesting. I've seen documentaries about this, and the Nazis, including Hitler himself, they were taking something called Pervitin. That was the pharmaceutical name for what later became known as crystal meth, and it was being given to the soldiers. And these guys, they were, what that stuff does, it erases fear, and it erases the conscience, and it erases human compassion. That's why these guys were so ruthless, why they became like virtual super soldiers. And they were able to stay awake for days at a time and travel for hundreds of miles in a day, because they were taking this stuff. And it was invented in Japan, and then they started exporting it to Germany in 1938. And Hitler had a quack doctor named Dr. Morello who would inject him full of this stuff through the day. And that would explain a few things. And it would explain why, people they have this false sense of invincibility. They think they can do things that they really can't. And it just destroys the human conscience. And it's still a problem in this society. It destroys the body, it destroys the mind, and that was a huge problem then. In fact, the German soldiers were still taking this stuff after the war. And it reminded me of what it says in Revelation about the pharmakia, the sorcery. Well, that's about all I got.
Well, do you have any theories on why Patton was apparently murdered?
That was a traffic accident. Somebody cut in front of him. And no, I don't think that was a homicide. And that was after the war. There was no reason to kill him.
Mark?
Mm-hmm.
I think I have the DVD or something, and I watched it. It's about how Patton died in the traffic accident and stuff. I know Bill O'Reilly has written a book with a different theory in there, which I haven't read, but it sure seems to me like the traffic accident is what really happened. Oh, and I almost have the pictures of that 10 million mark note put on a thumb drive on my old computer. I'm going to try to transfer it over and share it on the screen pretty soon.
Okay. Any other comments? I see Don Ross' mic is unmuted.
You may remember a gentleman named Mr. Westfall.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
He explained how rapidly the inflation worked over there. He said that his grandparents had set aside enough money for him to get a college education. And on his graduation from high school, he would receive this lump sum. Well, when he graduated, all the money that they had set aside for him was enough to buy him a new set of clothes. But by the time the end of the day arrived, it only paid his car fare home.
Oh.
So that was one of the stories that he told me about the inflation in Germany.
Well, by the way, I should mention that the Germans actually did pay off all the reparations from the Treaty of Versailles. They made their final payment in 1982. Here's another thing. Britain actually paid off its entire war debt and made their final payment in 2010. They defaulted on their World War I debt back in 1934. They didn't pay all that, but they did pay their World War II debt. So I got to give them some credit.
Well, that was because it was Lend-Lease.
It's easy to pay a debt off when you have inflation. That's one.
Well, we're headed for a lot of inflation, I'm sure. We're just printing up money like crazy. Unless COVID relief.
That's okay. They'll give us $1,400 and they'll send them somewhere else.
I would like to run a thought by some of these other gentlemen who's I've never met. Luke 16:9. I take this to have prophetic import, and that it may suggest we won't have a defaulting of the currency until Yeshua gets here. It says, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous mammon, so that when it defaults, they may receive you into everlasting tents or tabernacles. Suggests that money, the US dollar, which is basically the backbone of world currency somehow at this late stage, but suggests that the US dollar may not default until they receive us into everlasting habitations. Any thoughts?
Well, we'll see about that. I don't know. I hope not.
Yeah, I have a thought on that. For years, I read that, and I think it's sarcasm. He's telling them, go ahead and make friends of unrighteous mammon and see where that's going to get you. See if you can buy your way into everlasting habitations. I think it's a statement of pure sarcasm, which
No,
is
it could
a
be
strong
talking
teaching.
about. Go ahead.
Which is a very strong teaching tool. How many parents have made sarcastic statements to their children when their children are being stupid? Or how many bosses have made sarcastic statements to get a point across? Sarcasm is a very good way of teaching sometimes when it's appropriate.
What?
But if he's suggesting that you can be making as a good steward of your tithes, offerings, whatever, if you're making friends with Yahweh and His Son, then it wouldn't necessarily have to be sarcastic.
Okay, well, after having thought about it for some time, I can make sense of it. But maybe you're right, and maybe it has some other meaning to it. But why would our Lord ever tell us to make friends of unrighteous mammon?
Or by means of. My ESV says by means of.
I can't think of where it is, but it talks about the unprofitable or the steward that knew he was going to get fired, so he started saying, "Oh, here, this debt's paid off in half, and this debt's paid off in half," so that when he got fired, he had friends that he could turn to. Maybe that parable applies to that statement that you made, that maybe you need to be frugal with your money and who you're making friends with to make sure you're out. I don't know. It's just an idea that just popped into my head about the guy that was the steward of the money. was making deals to make sure they had somewhere to go. I can't remember what scripture that is.
Yes, that's Luke 16.
Right.
That's the lead up to the passage that I read.
It
It is a little difficult to understand why he would speak that way about unrighteous men. It's a little bit hard to get that, but
Well,
Yeah.
it's quite simple at the end of the age, and in most places, even the Roman Empire. But in most countries, there's no equal weights and measures for the issuance of currency because the most wicked people in the world always want to get control of it. You know, look at Andrew Jackson. They attempted to assassinate him when he became president because he was against the national bank. Lincoln ended up getting assassinated because he bypassed.
Well, he actually tried to pay off our debt. We had
Who
a
did?
debt to England that we agreed to with the Treaty of 1783 that ended the Revolutionary War.
The Peace of Paris.
Right. We agreed to pay the king's money for that war. And he was trying to pay it off so that we'd be free of that obligation and no longer have influence from the crown. He had the vision to
Jackson?
do that.
Mhm.
So, but the elites plunged us into the greatest depression this country ever experienced to disgrace them, and then they finally killed them.
Could you say that again? I missed some of that. The last minute or two.
I said he was trying to get away from the influence of the crown. He
Yeah.
was trying to pay off the debt that we owed. And he knew
Right, I
that
heard
while
that.
we were still debtors, we were still under their control.
Mhm.
And the people that be the elites and the ones that run the money plunged us, they basically pulled our money, plunged us into a depression and made him look really bad. And then, of course, he died. So,
what I would like to get back to the parable.
okay.
And what you have to realize is that he was stealing from his employer.
Okay.
And God, that's sin, plain and simple. So when you understand that, now if you apply that to the meaning of the parable, you will come up with the right answer. If you don't, you'll never understand that parable. It's that straightforward. It's not difficult. In other words, what you're saying, if you follow what is being said about it, you're saying, well, that's an acceptable thing to do what he did, to steal from your employer. And that's still stealing. And that's a sin. And God never advocates sin.
Good point.
What then is the upshot of the positive command to make friends for yourselves by means of mammon? Is there no positive takeaway?
Well, I did do a sermon on this it was a long time ago. And it's, could you give me the actual verse in Luke 16 that you're talking about?
Verse 8 and 9.
Okay. And the Lord commended the unjust steward, commended the unjust steward because he had done wisely. For the children of this world in their generation are wiser than the children of light. That's the real point right there. It's not that it's not that he's commending the illegal action there. He's what he's pointing out there is the wisdom that was being employed. In other words, he's saying that the children of light do not employ the wisdom that they should be employing. That's what it's all about.
That's for sure.
It takes a bit more explanation. You really have to go into it. And
Mr. Roth?
What I was prepared to do.
Mr.
Yes.
Roth?
Yes.
I don't know how this reads, but I just happened to find something that I've got saved on my computer, and I knew where to find it. It's a commentary on that parable from the F.B. Meyer commentary. I don't know how accurate it is, but I saved it, so I'll kind of read it here. It says, "We are all stewards, but how much we waste. Well, might our master deprive us of our post and trust. The unjust steward uses opportunity of ingratiating himself with the tenants of the landowners at the landowner's cost. He thus secured for himself welcome to their homes, and when his motives came to light, he was dismissed. Our master did not commend this fraud, but pointed out that the children of this world are singularly alive to their future and prepare for its contingencies. If they make a wrong use of money to provide for the future, how much more should Christians make the right use of it, so that when they die, they may be welcomed into the eternal home by those they have benefited." That's one of them.
That's pretty much the point I was trying to make at the beginning.
Yeah.
I won't read them all. I've got a couple other commentaries too, but I did get my picture of my $10 million mark note, and I'm going to try to share that.
Well, go ahead and try to share it, because I think sharing is open.
Okay, just a second. Got to close a couple things here to do that.
By the way, I was very grateful for the presentation tonight. I failed to say so, but that was pretty sobering.
Yeah, it's very sobering.
Well, I didn't know if anybody would be interested in this. I thought it was interesting, but that's just me. But I know that I kind of do cover kind of sad topics, but these are lessons that we can learn from. That's how I look at it. I mean,
Can everybody see that? That's the back side of the note.
Yeah, we see that.
Okay, here's the front. 10 million marks. It's 1923.
What's that compared to $30 trillion?
Not the paper it's printed on.
Somebody had a really good explanation, and I can't remember it, but they took money and they equated it to time. And they had $1 million is so many seconds. $1 billion was 9 or 10 hours, and $1 trillion was 1,960 years. Just to put it in perspective of how big a number that is, they put it in the space of time, and it was like, whoa. You go from so many seconds to so many hours to thousands of years. It's just mind-boggling when you put it that way.
I don't think the church, I don't think believers could do a work if the dollar defaulted before Christ got here.
Well, I think this is before you started tuning in, Todd. We did a presentation, we played a video of a lady who was in the know on the finances, and basically there's a big reset coming. They're going to unhook from the dollar and go to a cryptocurrency. That's going to be, I think it's going to be based on the basket of all currencies, and they're going to unhook from the buck. And it'll be an electronic currency, so they'll have more control. And so basically, if you don't follow the party line, you don't do what you're supposed to do, click, they turn off your credit. You can't buy or sell.
Yeah, But that sounds like shades of Revelation 13,
Exactly.
which
Yeah.
is
Right. That's
well.
She
But
brought
one
that
problem
up.
with that is, the Brussels Electronic Accounting Surveillance Terminals, otherwise known as the Beast, has enough computer capacity to monitor every financial transaction on the face of the planet. But that system won't be in place until halfway through the period in the Book of Revelation.
They are working on it now, and they're just buying time for the dollar. Well, her explanation was, it's not ready yet. The system, it's still in the development stage. It's progressing nicely, but they're trying to buy time. And in the meantime, we're going through all this inflating. Then eventually they're gonna pull the plug on it.
Right.
Go to the new system, which we have absolute control over our money.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, those who listen regularly see that, remember that.
I don't really know why anybody would like a cashless society. One click and all your wealth is gone.
That's what the elites want.
Well, that would be tough on the mobsters, wouldn't it?
Well, that's what the excuse they're using. See, I'm hearing this right now that as a roll into the picture here. I've heard that now that they're using it. Oh, we can control illegal funds. We can control trafficking. We can do all this with this new currency. So,
Like they're not involved in it already, up to their neck.
oh no, that was sarcasm.
You remember this? Anybody remember a guy named Bernard from Netherlands? For 5 years, he worked on money laundering for the international bankers. That guy's testimony was for real. He was doing such a good job of laundering their money. They were going to promote him to higher levels of the Luciferian movement over there, and they started inviting him to sex parties, and that didn't faze him too much because he was happily married. And then they invited him to a human sacrifice, and it so traumatized him he woke up in an emergency ward of a hospital, and his mother was sitting in the room, and there was a Bible there, and he ended up giving his life to Christ. He was so traumatized and he immediately resigned his position and went public with what he knew. He said that the Luciferians over there were involving Western nations in all kinds of nefarious starting of wars here, there, and everywhere in the Middle East, etc. And he was just, his conscience didn't bother him for a while, but then he just had to get out of it. Guy's name is Bernard. I haven't seen anything by him in 4 or 5 years, but I guess he went public with it so they wouldn't kill him. But
I haven't heard about that name. I mean, I've heard people talk about the Bohemian Grove in California, and the political ties there. And I guess the Grove has been sold, I was told. It is no more.
Who bought it?
I don't know, some corporations to make condos.
Really?
It's done, yeah. But they've moved it bigger and better. They've moved it somewhere else.
Oh.
it costs too much money to build the fences to keep Alex Jones out.
Yeah.
Another thing to check out is the World Economic Forum with the Great Reset.
Yeah, Great Reset.
I tried to get a copy of Time Magazine article issue that came out that was just full of it. I do have the website, so it's a lot harder to get to all the articles than than the issue of the magazine. They just didn't have it available, and I tried to get it.
What you're gonna find is you're gonna find information is getting harder and harder to find. They're censoring big time. And I was trying to point out to somebody that look at the total number of deaths in the United States in the last 10 years, year by year, and to show what effect COVID had. And then 2 weeks later, that information is no longer available on the web. Amazing. So we're under heavy censorship right now.
Yeah, no question. That's men in England, medical authorities over there who've complained that the death rate really hasn't gone up. Have you heard that?
Yeah. No, you look at the numbers, even all the countries, we run between 2 and 3%. And 2019 had a drop. It dropped to like 1.2%. And then 2020, it jumped back up to the 3. So they used that as a launch board. Oh, the COVID has increased death by 2%. No, we had a huge drop the year before, and it went right back up to the number, right back up to where it was. So they haven't done it. But now you can't find those numbers.
Oh, you want to know how much money Fauci makes? My son sent me an email from Forbes. He makes more than the president does. He's a federal employee, $417 million.
400,000 a year is his salary, right? But he probably makes a ton of money off of patents that he stole.
Right, 400.
And that's